being so exhausted all the time is depleting for you as a leader, and that being kind of a switch of being like always on, and the hustle culture, like being the best thing, to actually, I'm going to be a much better leader. I'm going to bring more creativity. I'm actually going to bring more thoughtfulness if I have other things kind of filling my life. It became a key part of my life of like, no, friends, family, dating, being a holistic human being makes me a better contributor at work as well. And I feel incredibly lucky at 1111 that I work my butt off. We all work our butts off, but there's a real understanding of humanity and a real understanding that finding partnership, that spending time with your family makes you a better contributor.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to How She Does It, where we connect with women at the top of their game. And we literally ask them, how do they do it? I'm Karen Finerman, and thank you for hitting play on this episode. You may have seen me on Fast Money on CNBC. I'm a long-term Wall Street investor, a mom of 4, and a huge WNBA fan. Here, we have conversations about the intersection of women, money, and power. And today, we've got a very cool guest. Do you consider yourself a brand loyalist? Do you prefer Nike over Adidas? Do you like UPS or FedEx? Coke over Pepsi? Personally, I like Fresca. Brands mean something to us, and why we choose one over the other can be deeply personal. And smart brand management and marketing can help create and sustain those connections with consumers. Of course, people can be brands as well. Celebrities in particular have capitalized on this idea, using their names to launch businesses that build on their public personas. Think Rihanna, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Jessica Alba, to name a few. And then there's the brand of Paris Hilton. She's been called a pop culture symbol like no other. And today, we're meeting the woman behind Paris Hilton's 11.11 Media. Rachel Weber has been fascinated by women in television and film since she was young, even writing term papers on the feminist impact of Ally McBeal. At Paris Hilton's 11.11 Media, which Rachel joined in early 2024, she has been tasked with expanding global business for the uber-famous multi-hyphenate Paris through new products, content, and impact. I first met Rachel at an event for CNBC's Changemakers. I recall her being very sharp and incredibly personable, and I'm so happy she joined me for this episode. We talked about what it's like working with Paris Hilton as her chief commercial and chief brand officer, how listening to a podcast changed her career trajectory, and her thoughts on making time for dating amidst her demanding schedule. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. It was so great meeting you, and I just felt like we just had a really interesting conversation. We met at the Changemaker dinner, and we had this little nice end of our table, Nafisa Collier, the basketball player, me, you, Nancy Brown, the head of the American Heart Association. And I loved meeting you. I loved what you're doing, and that's why I asked you to be here today, and I'm so happy that you said yes.
Well, honor to be here.
Okay, so for people who don't know, how did you get connected with 11.11 Media, and what exactly is your job?
So my professional background is a mix of roles at big traditional media companies. I kind of grew up in the Fox News Corp universe and did everything from work on big corporate initiatives to work at TV studios in LA to work at the big pay TV business in Australia. And now I mixed that in with some consumer tech experiences. I was at Tumblr in the early days, and then I was at Angry Birds, which was based in Finland, and helped build that iconic franchise. And it was really at Angry Birds that I realized this passion for kind of building new businesses off the back of big IP and IP that has this like incredible fandom to it. So after Angry Birds, I made my way back to Fox and then quickly over to National Geographic, which Fox had an ownership stake in, where I ran the digital business. And then from Nat Geo, after there was a change in ownership there, I ended up at Playboy, actually. And I'm sure
one does.
Talk a little bit about that, the classic Nat Geo to Playboy pipeline. And was at Playboy for about 5 years, where I helped reinvent and reintroduce that great iconic brand. And it was an amazing adventure, one that I'll cherish forever and learned so much from and built the most special friendships and mentorships with. And then I was ready for a break. It was, I just kind of felt a lot of burnout, honestly. So I took 4 months off. And I reached out to someone who I went to college with, Carter Ream, who is Paris's husband, who runs a venture fund. And I was reaching out more, what was he seeing, particularly in the kind of LA startup space. And he said, wait a second, like Paris's business is on fire. It combines everything you've done before. And she is this kind of human embodiment of one of the great iconic brands, where we're building businesses in so many different categories. And he said, dive in. And so I did just that. And that was about a year and a half ago.
She has this big ambition of her literally saying, I want to be the next Disney. So how do you make that happen?
Yes. Well, so we run a kind of 24/7 content creation and community engagement machine with different formats in a distributed fashion across all different social platforms. Within that, then, we work with brand advertisers to help them reach their audiences, and they want to reach Paris's audiences, and they want Paris to help insert them into pop culture. So we work with everyone from Motorola to Joe and the Juice to Absolute Vodka to Frank's Hot Sauce, to big fashion brands. We then have a consumer products business, which primarily has been a licensing business. Paris is kind of the OG in monetizing her brand. She just released her 30th fragrance,
which
actually.
Is crazy.
And we have products and categories from fashion to fragrance to beauty, homeware, which is a major category for us. That'll be about a $100 million retail business in Walmart this year.
Wow.
And that was something that was actually born off the back of content and a Netflix show that Paris had done on Cooking with Paris. And just a few weeks ago, we announced Paris's skincare brand, which is actually a JV that we did with Guthy Ranker, and represents a kind of future model that we'll be investing more in, which is an ownership stake in the categories that we're expanding into. And then the third pillar of the business are content formats that are more longer form content formats. So TV productions, film productions. We have an audio partnership with iHeart, where we've done both Paris's podcast, but then also podcasts that just represent Paris's lifestyle. We just released our first true crime podcast that was something connected to a crime being solved off of social media, so very connected to kind of Paris's embrace of that medium. And then music, I would put in that bucket as well.
Right.
And we released Paris's second album just last year and starting to work on her third. And then underpinning all of this, we have an incredible impact platform as well. The woman who runs our impact business, Rebecca Groen, was actually employee number 3 at the company roughly 4.5 years ago when Paris started the company with Bruce Gersh. And leaving a sparkle everywhere Paris goes is her mission, which is actually, sounds very fun, but has real profound meaning. And Paris is so dedicated to turning her own pain into purpose and her own life experience into purpose and responsibility for helping others. And so we weave that through our storytelling. We weave that into our brand partnerships, into how we bring our consumer products to market. That really drives the storytelling mission that we have. So we're operating this flywheel in a sense. It just happens to be off the back of, a person who's engaging with fandoms everywhere.
Okay, so she's very savvy about her public persona, and there's different sides to her which she uses to her advantage. How have you found her to be, working with her?
Paris is the kindest. She is such a kind soul. She is the hardest working person on the planet, which I both admire, and I see how much that inspires our entire team. And she is so kind of technology savvy and technology obsessed. She's always tinkering. She genuinely stays up late at night, working with AI, image generation tools, for example, developing new creative franchises and formats in her head. And she's a natural brand builder. She sees around corners. She really is that kind of OG. And looking back, if you pinched me 20 years ago and said, this is what you're going to be doing 20 years from now, you kind of wouldn't believe it. And I was thinking about it earlier that I do think that kind of young women and Paris's contemporaries in that era understood that she was kind of always in control of the narrative and that she was kind of playing a part.
Right.
And she controlled the medium.
Yeah.
So it was that tabloid era, but she was so savvy, and she obviously now she's talked publicly about it, but I think women our age were kind of in on the joke that was a character she created, that Simple Life character, the dumb blonde character.
Right.
And I think there was something really relatable for people, kind of creating a character to get what they want. Yeah.
I love that she used that to her advantage. Yeah. And you look at her differently and you think, oh, she knows exactly what she's doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have to just talk about from an infinite icon.
Yeah, I love it.
So this is literally taking documentaries to an entirely new dimension, literally.
Yes, we're so excited. Well, Paris released her first documentary about 4.5 years ago that since then has had 80 million views on YouTube. And that's the first time Paris told her story of the abuse that she endured in her teen years. And it was really the start of Paris reclaiming her voice. Then a few years later, actually, Paris released her memoir. One of the through lines of her memoir was the role of music in her life. Paris's first album came out about 20 years ago, and she felt that she never got the respect that she deserved for that, and she did it, and it was a great pop album. And so 20 years later, Paris decided, and part of this was with the nudging of Sia, actually, who Paris confided in, that she's always wanted to make a second album. And Sia said, great, I'm going to executive produce it. And so they kicked off this work. We called the album Infinite Icon. It came out last September. It's just an incredible pop album, and that has features from Meg Thee Stallion, Meghan Trainor, Rina Sawayama, Maria Becerra. It was the number one most selling pop album the week it came out. We had 100 million earned media impressions that first week it came out. So proud of just how we brought it to the world. And the whole experience of making the album, we documented, of course, because we're running that 24/7 content creation machine. And we knew that this was such a powerful part of Paris connecting with her fans. And last fall, after the album came out, we did a headline show at the Hollywood Palladium, which was incredible, and we documented that as well. So the film, Infinite Icon, which is coming out the beginning of next year, and we're doing this in partnership with CJ Group, which is a pioneer in kind of immersive screen experiences. So they have both 4DX screens where things can pop out at you kind of in the theater.
How does that work? What is the interaction?
The seats can move. There are scents and all of that good stuff. As you're watching it, you could imagine that we have amazing special effects in her music performances. And then they also have theaters that are their ScreenX theaters that have kind of screens in front and then on the sides of you. So it just has that extra immersion to it. So it will feel like you're there in the Hollywood Palladium when you're watching those parts of the film. Get excited and mark your calendar, and we'll be announcing the release date soon.
Okay, so you have so many things going on, so many things you're trying to do. How do you lead while you're trying to do all of it?
Yeah. The honest answer is it's tough, and it's a challenge that we, I think, kind of ask ourselves every day. We employ at the company a classic OKR, kind of leadership and management methodology, where we have we went through a whole process with the team of
OKR. Let me just stop you there.
I will. Okay. I'll explain. So of defining first and foremost our key objectives at the company. And so those key objectives are, kind of building this massive consumer products business, expanding our social audience, expanding our owned audience. So those are just some examples of kind of the big lofty ambitions that we have as a company. And then what we've done is break down the key results that we want to see for ourselves on a quarterly basis to measure our progress against those big O's that we have as a company. And then in our weekly meetings and our monthly meetings and our kind of quarterly check-ins, we are holding ourselves accountable to have we been focused on these key objectives that we've set out. So I'm a huge lover of that kind of OKR management style, and it just helps the team stay focused and have them really understand what are the core priorities that we're going after to minimize as much as possible the day-to-day distractions and the day-to-day, kind of influx of opportunity and needs, and making sure that we're always balancing the resources that we're putting in are reflective of the priorities that we want to achieve and are reflective of us building enterprise value for the company.
Okay, so getting down to your leadership style, do you have sort of a few rules that you come to see as, all right, this is the way I want to lead?
Yeah.
This works best.
I've learned about myself, I'm a consensus builder, but not in a kumbaya way, in a way where I see it as most productive if you're taking everyone on a journey. I really believe that a positive and a strong culture at a company is built off of everyone understanding the direction that they're rowing in, everyone having an ability to articulate what that North Star goal is for the company, and then every single person knowing what their role and responsibility is and how that ladders up to the goal. So what I've tried to do is be both a visionary leader and in telling that story, and I think I'm a pretty good storyteller, but match that with the practicality of working with each team member or working with managers to make sure they're working with each team member to ensure that every single person knows what they're doing. I strengthened this muscle for myself at National Geographic. When I started there, on my first day, I was handed 2 pieces of paper by my boss that had 9 disparate teams circled. And he said, okay, this is the new digital team. And they had previously never worked together. There frankly wasn't a clear articulation of actually what the purpose was of this function within the group. There was definitely an ambition of make money for the company. And then there was the ambition of and help serve as a kind of services function and a digital foundation layer for the TV business, for the trips and travel business, for the magazine business. But how we were going to do that, what those specific goals were going to be, weren't defined. And these team members, some of them had previously worked on the nonprofit side of the company. Some of them were in TV, some were in the magazine. And this was the first time they were all coming together. So it was a very big kind of trial by fire. And I found there the power in gathering everyone together, articulate, it took a second, but there was also a process of actually getting everyone's input too that was so crucial. And I've so learned the value of really, it has to start with listening, because then you're getting people invested. You're learning something, and there's so many amazing insights, but then you're really getting people invested in the journey if they played a role in helping shape and articulate it. And one of the things I'm most proud of in my career is shaping that Nat Geo team into a unified organization. One of my most fun things that we instituted there to kind of help facilitate this knowledge share as well was I started something called just show and tell. And every other week we'd have different teams sharing what one of their big projects from the week or the month that they were focused on. So each team started to understand how they fit together. And then, kind of by the end of it, everyone was volunteering and they wanted to share what they were doing. And
so proud of it.
They're so proud of it.
Do you remember going to show and tell when you were a little kid? You're
of
like,
course.
This is my favorite rock.
Of course. And then that to me is how you build a sense of accountability too. I've also, as a leader, I really try to lean into kindness and empathy. I do think I had to shed some of maybe what I learned early on as a more junior member of the team of leading from a place of fear. I think some of that came from a lot of places, but even thinking back to like my ballet teacher played a huge role in my life, and classic ballet teacher, there was discipline in there, and her style was if she believed in you, she'd kind of pick on you more and have higher expectations. And I love this woman more than anything in the world, but I grew up with that as a leadership style. And I think that was kind of part of my muscle memory. And those were things that probably weren't authentically me. Also, I'm 20 plus years older than some of the women and men. We have a lot of women on the team. And so it's just a different style. Like the leadership that I was around when I entered the workforce, and a little bit more of that kind of fear-oriented leadership is not authentically me, and that I've let go of.
Okay, so I want to talk about your personal life.
Let's do it.
Okay, so you've had a lot of big jobs, interesting jobs. Nat Geo sort of was a higher level. You moved to DC. Did you know anyone there? What was like, that's a big move.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I remember when I was nudged to raise my hand for the role. And at that point, I had been back in LA for maybe 2-ish years after the Rovio Angry Birds role. And at Angry Birds, I was on a plane every week, every other week, because it was based in Helsinki. Mm-hmm. I had this incredibly glamorous life on Instagram, for example, but I was exhausted. I had jet lag to the bone. And I really, I wanted to stay in one place. I also wanted to invest in my personal life, and I was single at the time. And the idea of moving across the country again was something that just wasn't high on my to-do list. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, this was a role that felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I remember a former boss of mine who was part of nudging me to raise my hand for the role. I was like, I don't want to move again. And he's just like, why? What do you have keeping you here? He's like, you don't have a husband and kids. And, you know, on the one hand, like that reaction annoyed me.
Right.
And on the other hand, I know he was saying the truth, and it was 100% the right choice for me to go there.
So you're there and you got this enormous project, which is bigger than just your job. It's sort of organizing and figuring out where everything is and how to make this.
And you're responsible for 150 people's like emotional experience every day. And a good friend of mine, Jesse Angelo, actually said to me a number of years ago, remember, the energy that you bring walking in every day is the energy that they take home. Mm-hmm. And I internalized that and like just thought to myself of every single one of these people, they get in the car, they get on the train and drive home, and maybe they call their mom on the way home. That's something I do all the time. Mm-hmm. And the energy that I bring to the table and the interactions that we have are like defines the energy that they call their mom with, defines how they have an interaction. So that is a huge amount of responsibility.
And great advice.
Amazing advice. And I take that so to heart. And that's why I love the practice of leadership and management, because it allows you to really make an impact on someone's life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're there. Mm-hmm. Then remind us what's next for you.
I mean, even in prepping for today, I was thinking through like just challenges that I've experienced too. And the end of Nat Geo was not what I expected. You know, I remember sitting at a conference table when we all got the push notification that Disney was going to acquire Fox. And it was like, no way. Like Rupert's the one that buys things, like not the other way around. It was just a shock to the system. And we were about 1.5 years into the work that we were doing to really build out this media unit. We had just made a big presentation to senior leadership and the board around a home membership proposition. And so we were like just so excited to build, and the team was cohesive. And then it just kind of became clear right off the bat that everything was going to be put on pause as that was being figured out. And it was clear that the way Disney is structured didn't make sense. Totally fine. Just didn't make sense based on the way that kind of Fox had things structured with Nat Geo as its kind of full standalone unit. And it made a lot more sense to layer and kind of integrate a lot of those services into shared services. And so saw the writing on the wall and, you know, spoke to a few of my kind of most trusted advisors, you know, kind of personal board of directors style. And at first, I thought what was right for me was staying there in a little bit more of like an advisory capacity that I was talking to the leadership at Nat Geo about. And so went about that for like a week or so, and I was like, this actually isn't real. Like I could tell that there just wasn't enough substance for me. And I also really didn't want to be stuck in DC.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask next.
Yeah, and so I remember that day that I had made up my mind and said, you know what, I'm going to transition out and I'm going to go talk to them about that. And I remember I took a walk. I walked down to the White House and I sat in front of the White House and I was just like, there've been a lot harder things that have happened in the world. Yeah. I can muster the courage that those people have mustered. And I walked back to the office. I loved that setting in DC. It was such a special experience. Yeah. And I went in and I said, you know what? I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's been life-changing, but it makes sense for me to help transition and to leave. So that was the first time I leapt without the next thing defined.
So how did that feel?
Yeah, it felt a little terrifying, probably. It also felt freeing. I can't fully remember, but I think now I am able to tap into that feeling of like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, and I think that's like a great kind of mantra. What's the worst thing that happened? Okay, I don't get a job for 6 months, or I do side projects. And so I'm able to look back on that and tap into that. But at the time there were a lot of
you
tears.
Feeling it that way then.
Fully. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so tell us, how did you get to Playboy?
This is one of my favorite stories of my life. So I was on a train on the Amtrak going back from New York to DC after the Webby Awards. And I was pretty exhausted. And I was listening to Kara Swisher's podcast because I'm a huge Kara Swisher fan. At that point, it was Recode Decode. I think I was actually listening to the episode on OKRs because I'm a total dork and I love that. And I got off the train and I see Kara like 3 paces in front of me. And it was one of those things where like I did not have the energy to talk to anyone, but she was right. I had to. So I just said, "Hey, Kara, like listening to you right now," pointed at my ear. And I was like, huge fan, and intending to just wave and give her a shout out. She said, "No, come here. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she's like, "Who are you?" And, you know, because I think it felt that more intimate because we were in DC versus New York or LA, where it's kind of like everyone knows each other type thing. And I said, "Oh, I work at National Geographic and I run the digital business there." So, "Oh my gosh, you know, do you work with this one?" And now I say, "Yes." And she said, "That's so interesting. How long have you been there?" So very quick chat. She's like, "Well, I'd love to continue this conversation, like learn more about what you guys are up to at Nat Geo." And I was like, "Okay," like thinking she was fully just being nice. And then later that day at the office, you know, she followed me on social platforms. I was like, okay, maybe she's actually genuinely interested. So I reached out, said, let's get lunch, thinking the best thing that could come out of it was that, you know, Recode would do like a small article or something on what we were up to. And then we had lunch. She said, you know, I'd love to have you and Courtney, who are in the TV business, and Susan, who ran the magazine, on the podcast together. So I think it's fascinating that it's 3 women at the top of Nat Geo running these 3 parts of this, you know, major brand. And I said, oh my gosh. And I've never been more nervous in my life, like the week leading up to that. But we did it.
So that's scarier than doing the business, making it, turning around, putting it all together.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, so that happened, went really well, you know, felt great about it. What an amazing opportunity. Okay, fast forward. It wasn't even that long. It might have been like fast forward 6 weeks type thing. And I had the story I told you, I had decided to leave Nat Geo, and I got back to LA and the Playboy team reached out, and lo and behold, the CEO of Playboy had heard that podcast.
Really?
Yes. So it's one of those things where you never know what's going to happen. And my first reaction when they reached out was not the brand for me, but of course I'll take the meeting.
Right,
you never know what happens in life. And it had been acquired by a private equity firm. And I thought great relationships to build. And frankly, I'm intrigued. And what I saw right away was actually the problems that they were working on solving were the same problems we're working on solving at Nat Geo. How do you take a great legacy iconic brand and make it relevant for a new generation of consumers? And particularly those 2 brands are media brands at their core, and audiences feel a deep emotional connection kind of through content and storytelling. I encountered this team that was just so creative and thoughtful. And that was a huge criteria for the next thing I was going to do. Just want to work with great people. And also one that were a team that was really willing to grapple with bringing forward the parts of the brand that were part of the future and taking ownership for and acknowledging the parts of the brand that were not. And it wasn't about putting lipstick on a pig, frankly. And then the third piece was the more I got to know the brand itself, I fell in love with it. Just a brand that stands for free expression and sex positivity, and had this incredible heritage of being a platform for iconic voices through the Playboy interview, working with the biggest artists on the planet. And I saw at its core that Playboy is a culture driver and kind of represents like American pop culture. And that just felt really fun for me. So I decided to dive in.
And how long were you there?
5 years.
Wow.
Yes.
So you're in New York and LA now. If I ask you the question, where do you live?
I never know how to answer that right now because I'm like, well, I have a house in in LA, and that's where I live and pay taxes. But I just did get a little apartment here in New York in January, and really driven off of personal reasons. It's enormously helpful for work, and we actually have part of the team here. We have our social and digital team here, and it's been invaluable to get to mentor them. But my family's here. My brother's in Brooklyn with 2 nephews. My parents are in Boston, but they're actually going to move closer to the city. And New York has always felt like home. And then on a personal life, it's better for dating for me. I know we're kind of going there, so I will. And it was a life decision where it was like, you know what, I'm gonna go for it.
How do you go about that? How did you get to that decision? How do you go about it?
Yeah, well, how did I get to that decision? Look, I did a lot of executive coaching at Playboy. I said to the CEO, we should work with someone here because then we have this shared language of growth. And he brought in, Ben Cohen, the CEO there, brought in this incredible coach, Neil Shore. And I went through a process of just really becoming a better leader and being so exhausted all the time and kind of is depleting for you as a leader. And that being kind of a switch of being like, always on, and the hustle culture, like being the best thing, to actually, I'm going to be a much better leader, and I'm going to bring more creativity. I'm actually going to bring more thoughtfulness if I have other things kind of filling my life. And so I built that muscle memory at Playboy. And towards the end of Playboy, I was really able to kind of release and start focusing on personal life. I did actually take about 4 months off between Playboy and 11/11, and that was just magical and such a gift that I was able to do that. And I think in that period, I really prioritized dating too. I've just been, a lot of forces, one being not lucky in meeting that person yet, but that it became a key part of my life of like, no, friends, family, dating, and being a holistic human being makes me a better contributor at work as well. And so part of my criteria for finding that next role was going to be is that I wanted to find a role where I could bring my full self to work. And I feel incredibly lucky at 11/11. I work my butt off. We all work our butts off, but there's a real understanding of humanity and a real understanding that finding partnership, that spending time with your family, kind of makes you a better contributor.
All right. So I got to ask, how have you found dating in New York?
Better than LA.
Okay.
Yeah.
To what do you attribute that?
A little bit
different
more
culture.
Different culture, a little more sophistication, a little more intellectual. I also think just the environment in New York, like I think restaurants I think they're just better at lighting. I think they're better at music. I think they're better at ambiance, like holistically. In LA, at the end of a meal, you got to go to valet and you each get in your separate cars. And so there's just like this awkward dance. In New York, there's just a little bit more sex appeal to the city.
I love the city. I totally get what you're saying. So was there a point in your career where the money you were earning allowed you to do something that made you feel powerful or independent or successful? Or
the first thing that comes to my head is when I bought my house. So that was when I had moved back to LA from DC, and I'd started at Playboy because I needed a job to get a mortgage. But I bought a house on my own, and it's a beautiful house, and it's a Schindler, so it's famous architecture, and I love art and architecture. And there was a deep sense of pride and independence, when I did that. I remember actually being in a setting with one of my closest friends who runs a dance company, and we were with other women, and one of the women was maybe 15 plus years older, and Tina said, Rachel just bought this beautiful house, and I'm so excited for her. And she said, oh, like, do you have a partner? And I said, no, I bought the house myself. She said, you bought the house yourself? And it just was like, I'll just never forget that, because you forget, it hasn't been that long where women had their own credit cards.
Exactly.
Where women could, get their own mortgages. Yeah. And so I still feel really proud of that.
You should. I would imagine nothing else in your life that you ever buy will make you feel as proud as that.
Yes.
Okay, Rachel, time for a lightning round. So we have some fun questions, a few would you rather.
Let's do it.
The only thing is you just got to answer like pops into your head. Don't think about it.
Okay.
All right, ready? Okay. Would you rather go to a music festival with Paris or hang out with her in her home?
Go to a music festival with Paris. I was just with her at World Pride in DC, and before that we were at WeHo Pride in LA, and they are just the most magical experiences to see her fans, just how beloved she is to them and the way that she creates magic for them. And then we just have the best time.
Los Angeles or New York?
New York.
Mary Tyler Moore or Ally McBeal?
Oh my gosh,
I know you love
that's
both.
the ultimate. Oh, Mary Tyler Moore.
Okay. Sliving or That's Hot?
Oh my gosh. That's hot.
Okay. For anyone who might not know, sliving is slaying and living together. Being a bunny at the Playboy Club in the 1960s or wildlife photographer for National Geographic.
Oh my gosh. Honestly.
Which might be the same thing, looking at the,
Maybe being a Playboy bunny at the Playboy Club.
Okay, I get it.
I'm scared of animals.
Okay, what's one thing you've changed your mind about in the last year?
That switching costs are real. And I think I was always someone who, I'm really good at multitasking. I'm really good at holding multiple things in my head at once. Mm-hmm. Particularly in this role, we have so many things coming at us at any one time. Mm-hmm. We also use every communication method under the sun. Mm-hmm. So we've got Slacks and WhatsApps and email and iMessage. And it creates a kind of cacophony of distraction. And so I really learned that I need to create that space for deep work, need to turn some of those notifications off, and that I want to do as good a job as I can to protect the team from that constant context shifting, because I do think that it diminishes your productivity. And I can see for myself, I know when I'm bringing 80% to a conversation or to a Zoom meeting because I'm also trying to do this other thing, or I'm getting all these pings. So something that I'm constantly working on.
I agree 100%. Okay. And what's the best way you unwind?
Bath time?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Okay, the last one is in two parts. And it's what's the best investment you ever made and what's the worst, but it's a very broad term of investment. Right. It could be anything.
The best investment I ever made was my internship at New York Magazine senior year of college.
Okay.
I was always someone who was drawn to the media world, and it was listed on the Barnard career site. I applied, I went in, I got the job in the meeting, and my bosses there, Serena Torrey at the time, and then Betsy Burton joined her. They both have married names at this point. They became two of my closest friends in the world. But that opened my eyes to the New York media world. The first event I ever went to was the 20th anniversary of Bright Lights Big City at the Odeon. And there's just exposure to big New York media editors. It was like the last heyday of magazines. But through that were relationships that, Serena sent out an email when I was done with that internship. They didn't have any positions, but it was an email she sent that made its way to Gary Ginsberg, who then hired me at News Corp. And, the rest is history. So that was an incredible opportunity.
Okay, that's a great answer.
Worst investment. Well, I'll give you two answers. One is the amount of time that I spend scrolling on Instagram or Twitter, and it's just mindless and a huge time suck and doesn't make you feel good about yourself, particularly Instagram. And then the other piece is probably the investments I didn't make. So it's all of that money I spent on clothes in my 20s and 30s, and I wish I had just paid more attention to putting some of that money towards the market and learning more about being proactive in financial investment.
Okay, very good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
To find out more about Rachel's work and what Paris Hilton is up to, you can check out parishilton.com. Wishing you a week that is both sliving and hot. We'll have another great conversation for you soon. Until then, onward.